Researchers have successfully dated a set of mysterious phrases discovered on the ceiling of a Tibetan Tantric Buddhist cave temple in China. The Mogao caves are located on the ancient Silk Road in Dunhuang, northwest China, on the edge of the Gobi Desert. This dedicated UNESCO World Heritage Site features sacred meditational environments with high ceilings covered with paintings and inscriptions, some dated to over 1,000 years ago. Now, a research team using 3D spectral imaging equipment have scanned one of the Buddhist cave temples, and their high-resolution imaging of these ancient paintings and writings has solved several historical mysteries. A Hebrew University archaeology professor claims that he has identified 3 small male figurines which date back to the 10th and 9th centuries BC as the first known depictions of the biblical Israelite god Yahweh. Was it the laurel leaves which she's supposed to have chewed? The waters of the Castilian spring?
Eyewitness reports of the destruction of meteorites over Siberia in 1984 and 2002 by Terminator spheres give further credence to the accounts of the 1908 Tunguska explosions and the ancient legends. We can assume that with their powerful electromagnetic charge, they were supposed to attach themselves to a flying meteorite and alter its trajectory so that it passed out of the Earth's atmosphere. If the meteorite's trajectory was such as to make deflection impossible, the Terminator simply destroyed the rocky splinters, literally melting the meteoritic substance, which subsequently hardened into tiny spherules. Numerous soil samples taken at different distances from the destruction site have yielded magnetite spherules containing up to 10% nickel, which supports the idea that they came from space. The magnetite particles display a great variety of shapes and different surface characteristics. Besides the predominantly spherical formations, one can also find drop-shaped particles that were produced by the spattering of molten meteoritic substance under the influence of the colossal temperatures produced by the actions of the spheres. Some spherules have a shiny surface, others have a matte, grainy, and even finely porous surface, which is due in part to the meteoritic substance vaporizing when the matter was viscous. Often the spheres are hollow with a slag-like look to the inside. Sometimes one comes across conglomerations of magnetite and silicate spheres, indicating that they were formed at the same time and pointing to the complex composition of the Tunguska Meteorite associated with the genesis of these spherules. Work carried out in 1961 established that there is a certain pattern to the distribution of these spherules on the surface. The greatest concentration of them is found in a strip 60 kilometers wide, extending northwestwards from the epicenter of the meteorite explosion, and which can be traced for over 250 kilometers. In the disaster region, covering an area with a radius of about 130 kilometers from its center at the Kulik site, there are 3 identifiable zones of peat enriched with microspherules. The first, with a thin sickle shape, curves around the epicenter. The second reflects the movement of the unknown object in the region of zones 4 and 5, to the east and northeast of the Kulik site in the upper reaches of the southern Chunia River, and thus coincides with the start of the disintegration of the meteorite. The third zone, very large and amorphous, is located precisely in the region of Voronov's crater. It is no coincidence that the microspherules in this area display certain peculiarities of structure and formation that set them apart from those in the other zones. As the destruction of the meteorite took place directly in the ground, and so material from the soil became mixed with meteoritic matter during vaporization. The bolide was completely vaporized by the explosion, and the products of that process were scattered in the form of extremely fine spheres over an area of 15,000 square kilometers. Their combined mass is estimated at around 10 tons. It is for this reason that all the expeditions that visited the area of the explosion found nothing of the meteorite itself, apart from a dusting of silicate and magnetite spherules that the blast wave spread across the entire Earth. Decades passed, and then on the 26th of February 1984, a meteor crossed the sky of western and eastern Siberia at a height of roughly 100 kilometers, precisely following the trajectory of the 1908 Tunguska body. At that time, passengers in a bus observed from an elevated section of the Murni highway far to the north a thin pillar of fire extending from the ground to the sky that then began to undergo various geometrical metamorphoses. The sight lasted several minutes. Fishermen in the area of the river Chona observed rising into the air from the hills to the north, the Valley of Death region, two enormous shining spheres that, gradually picking up speed, soared vertically upwards and disappeared behind the clouds. The whole event took several minutes, after which time the clouds continued to glow for a while. Then, without reaching the ground, the object exploded in a shower of sparks in the area of the river Chalim. An expedition dispatched to that area found, as with the Tunguska event, no traces of meteoritic material apart from magnetite and silicate spherules. They discovered no large-scale uprooting of trees, as the explosion took place at great height. Drawing on data received from a military satellite, the U.S. Department of Defense distributed information about a large meteorite falling in the area of Badaibo in the Irkutsk region of Russia. The satellite recorded the appearance of a shining object at a height of 62 kilometers, moving at an angle of 32 degrees to the horizon. Observation continued to the point where a powerful explosion took place at a height of 30 kilometers. Preliminary calculations put the power of the explosion at an equivalent of 200 tons of TNT. The first interviews with witnesses to the Vitim meteorite explosion pointed to a parallel with the Tunguska event in terms of phases of development. It is noteworthy that one of the witnesses questioned noticed that his dog became agitated and began to whine half an hour before the explosion. Here are some eyewitness accounts. Yevgeny Yarygin was on duty at the electrical distribution centre in the settlement of Muscovite. I was on duty in the switchboard room whose window faces south. The weather was cloudy, rainy, and it was drizzling. We were sitting and chatting. A glow appeared outside the window. Shadows appeared. The light was coming from the window. Through the windows we could see a bright hemispherical glow beginning to rise from behind the hills to the southeast, at a bearing of roughly 160 to 170 degrees. The light was white, like you get in welding. The white light seemed to rise upwards, and behind it the light began to shift into the red and maroon. A red pillar was seen by the bus passengers before the Chalim explosion, and also by witnesses to the Tunguska explosion. Little rays were visible above the ascending hemisphere. The glow spread over the whole sky. The light was even and unbroken. We could not see any flying objects. The parting of the Yarmiki stream, above the watershed of which the glow was rising, was brightly lit. Then everything began to dim and went out. The glow lasted around 10 seconds. I went onto the landing outside, went to the fence and opened the door. By then about 30 seconds had passed after the disappearance of the glow. There was a penetrating report, an explosion, a very sharp bang. It made your ears ring and even made you weak at the knees. Plaster came down in the building. Everything moved and shook. There was a single bang. That was at 7 minutes to 2. But a distant noise had appeared even before the beginning of the glow, something like the roar from an aircraft. Witnesses to the Tunguska explosion compared this noise with a 3-inch shell in flight. The sound came from the same quarter as the glow, but the bang came from the opposite side, where the glow had been heading. I heard that someone was sitting in an armchair at home, and the chair moved under them. Viktor Vedeshin, questioned by telephone on the 22nd of October 2002, said, "I was on duty that night at the boat station. A strong wind blew, and at the same time a strong glow appeared in the sky. It was white with a greenish tinge to it, bright like a welding spark or lightning, making your eyes hurt to look at it. Right then a shining flying sphere appeared. It flew beyond the horizon in the direction of Maksimiki." Vitaly Valyuk, who worked at the town hall in Badaibo, noted, 8 minutes to 2 in the morning. Dense cumulus clouds in the sky. I was standing and smoking. Suddenly there was a flash. I thought it was lightning, but the glow grew as if someone was turning on one bulb after another. It became as bright as day. Some object flew from the southwest to the northeast. You couldn't tell if it was a sphere or not. It had a turquoise glow around it. It was perhaps the size of the lunar disk, and it had a tail behind it, reddish like the sparks from a bonfire. The angle of fall was about 60 degrees. The speed of the object was very high. While it all flew past, I had time to finish my cigarette, and 30 seconds later there came a rumble, like a distant explosion. Marina Kovaleva reported, "It was 5 to 2. That light lasted a few seconds, then everything turned pink. Then it got darker and darker and darker, becoming a reddish light. Then there was a rumbling. You got the impression, well, I don't know, like something below the ground. Not clear, but dull." A subterranean rumble from the working complex was also noted by the witnesses to the Tunguska explosion, who compared it to the rumble of train wheels. And after that rumble the window panes rattled. The glow was visible in the settlements of Kropotkin and Mama, located around 140 kilometers on either side of the object's presumed crash site. One of the witnesses stated, "Out of the blue my dog began to whine for no apparent reason. Suddenly we heard a strange noise, some kind of hum. 2 or 3 seconds later there was a flash, white at first, then blue, then red, and white again. And then, about 3 minutes later, there was a terrific bang. The china all fell off the table." The object detected by the American military satellite was not a meteorite or bolide. Its instruments recorded the flight of the first Terminator as it plunged down to intercept the Vitim meteorite, which gets its name from the place above which it exploded. A blinding flash lit up the tiger for a few instants with a bright light, like daylight, after which there came an explosion of such force that the blast wave, coming from a height of 32 kilometers, left all the dwellings for dozens of kilometers around without glass in the windows. The researchers who made their way to the explosion site indicated by the US satellite saw pines on the way with their tops and branches torn off. Yet when the instruments indicated they had reached their destination, they could not find a meteorite crater or even anything remotely resembling one. There was no large-scale uprooting of trees at the site because the first explosion took place much higher up than that at Tunguska and successfully deflected the meteorite away from inhabited settlements. However, significant uprooting of trees was observed, especially at the top of hills. After the first strike, which shifted the meteorite's course away from inhabited places, the other terminator spheres closed in and began methodically destroying the remnants of the intruder from space. The blast could be felt across a radius of no less than 30 to 50 kilometers from the epicenter. It took the tops off trees. The blast wave left all the dwellings for dozens of kilometers around without glass in the windows. As with Tunguska and Tarim, all the expeditions that went to the Vitim region found nothing except magnetite and silicate spherules that resulted from the destruction of a meteorite likely to have been carrying dangerous microorganisms. Many witnesses saw that two large radiant points moved along the same course as the meteorite. For 2 days, these little stars lit up the taiga by night, as if they were looking for something. The same thing was reported by witnesses to the Tunguska incident. Many people said that after a glow was seen in the sky for several days, that was the result of the Terminator sphere's powerful influence. It should be noted that atomic explosions at altitude change the conductivity of the ionosphere. This inevitably leads to a disturbance in the Earth's magnetic field, a so-called geomagnetic effect. The geomagnetic effect of the Tunguska event was discovered in 1959 by 4 researchers from Tomsk. They found traces of an unusual disturbance in the geomagnetic field. This makes it possible to suggest that the destruction of the meteorite caused an unusual disturbance in the geomagnetic field, similar to a magnetic storm, with a sudden onset but unusually short duration. One of the oldest doctors in the Evenk Autonomous Region, Dr. A.N. Deskov, recollected that rumours of some afflictions did circulate among the Evenk after the Tunguska event. For all the uncertainty of the situation, nevertheless observed that, in conditions of a complete absence of physicians or indeed any medical care, isolated cases of radiation sickness may have gone entirely unnoticed.
Nicholas Roerich was a Russian painter, scenic designer and writer who's probably best known for his work with ballet russes and especially for his monumental historical sets. Roerich was also a mystic and traveller who visited India and Tibet to study Eastern philosophy and history and also to search for rare manuscripts. There is some evidence to suggest that during the 1930s expedition to Mongolia, led by Roerich, backed by US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and something extremely strange was discovered. Some say that he found evidence for ancient technology, others that he unearthed a mysterious stone with strange powers. The enigmatic Nicholas Roerich. Roerich was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, on October 9, 1874. He was fortunate to have been brought up in the contented environment of an upper-middle-class Russian family with the advantages of contact with writers, artists and scientists who frequently came to visit him. After finishing university, he met Helena Shaposhnikov, a niece of the composer Mogorsky, and soon afterwards they married. Helena Roerich was a remarkable gifted woman, a gifted pianist and author of a number of books related to mysticism, including The Foundations of Buddhism and a Russian translation of Helena Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine. 1903 and 1904, the couple set off on a voyage of discovery to 40 cities throughout Russia. Roerich's intention was to contrast the styles and historical context of Russian architecture. However, he found that many of the historical structures had been neglected for centuries. Realizing their importance to Russia's cultural history, he set out to draw attention to the problem by painting a series of 75 works depicting the structures and also attempted to have them protected and preserved. Archaeological treasures from the Stone Age were of particular interest to him, and soon he amassed a large collection of artifacts from that period. In 1920, he emigrated to the United States, and that same year, in New York, founded with his wife the Agni Yoga Society, an organization that combines elements of Eastern thought with modern Western moral philosophy. Roerich was given the position of secretary of the School of the Society for the Encouragement of Art, later becoming its head, the first of a number of positions that he would hold as a teacher and spokesman for the arts. He brought an innovative and modern system of training in art to the society, organizing the teaching of all of the arts, painting, music, singing, dance, theatre, and also ceramics, painting on porcelain, pottery, and mechanical drawing in the same place. Roerich seems to have had talents for synthesis, which enabled him to correlate many apparently contradictory subjects, the philosophical with the scientific, the Eastern wisdom with Western knowledge, for example. Whilst in America, the Roerichs planned a voyage to India. The couple had always wanted to visit there, and there is certainly an orientation towards Eastern spiritual values reflected in many of Roerich's creative works at that time. A voyage to the East. In 1923, Roerich's dream finally came true when they embarked on their Central Asian tour. They landed in Bombay in December 1923, eventually visiting India, Chinese Turkestan, Altai, Mongolia and Tibet. Nicholas later wrote about this expedition in his book Heart of Asia, in which he described these mysterious lands and enigmatic peoples. During the expedition, Roerich's party apparently discovered enigmatic archaeological monuments and extremely rare manuscripts, though it's not clear now where those manuscripts are. One of the manuscripts was said to be a blueprint for an ancient Atlantean particle accelerator there, which he brought back to the US to be developed. In 1928, at the end of their major expedition, the family settled in the Kulu Valley, 6,500 feet up in the Himalayan foothills. Here they established the headquarters of the Urasvati Himalayan Research Institute, which was instituted to study the results of their expedition and of their forthcoming explorations. When Roerich returned to the US in 1929, he was famous. James Walker, the mayor of New York, greeted him at the City Hall, and President Franklin Roosevelt met him. Nicholas Roerich died in Kulu on December 13, 1947. Roerich is now seen as perhaps the complete representative of Russian symbolism and modernism, and has left a considerable legacy. Over 7,000 of his paintings are exhibited in well-known art galleries all over the world. He also wrote many books on various subjects, including tales, legends, poetry, and commentaries on life and events. Another of Roerich's legacies is the Treaty on the Protection of Artistic and Scientific Institutions and Historic Monuments, popularly known as the Roerich Pact. This was an inter-American treaty stating that the defense of cultural objects is more important than the use or destruction of that culture for military purposes. It was signed on April 15, 1935, and although it never became international law, its ideas were extremely influential in setting standards for future cultural preservation. The 1934-5 expedition and mysterious ancient technology. In 1934-35, Nicholas Roerich headed an expedition sent to areas of Inner Mongolia, Manchuria and China by the U.S. Ministry of Agriculture with the purpose of studying drought-resistant plants. Roerich had considerable support from the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Henry A. Wallace, who himself had a deep interest in theosophy and mysticism. President Franklin Roosevelt, also no stranger to mysticism, being a Freemason himself, was also enamored of Roerich. Some researchers question the stated nature of this expedition, believing it had more mysterious purposes. It is certainly true that the British Secret Intelligence Service had long suspected Roerich of some undisclosed nefarious activities. One or two researchers even believe that Roerich might even have been a spy for the Soviet Union. Indeed, by the end of 1935, both Roosevelt and Wallace were beginning to cut ties with Roerich due to his apparent pro-Japanese activities and contact with the Japanese War Ministry and Foreign Office during his time in the East. The Cintamani Stone. In 1933, Roerich painted a symbolistic work called the White Stone, sign of Cintamani or Horse of Happiness. In Buddhist and Hindu tradition, the Cintamani stone was said to be a wish-fulfilling jewel which fell from the sky in Tibet inside a chest filled with 3 other ancient artifacts. The Cintamani stone, which translates roughly to thought gem or wishing stone, is said by some mystics and paranormal researchers to be of an extraterrestrial origin and was brought to Earth by emissaries from a planet orbiting the star Sirius. It was given to Shambhala's principal resident, the mysterious king of the world, a monarch known by many Eastern mystics and only by a select few in the West. In Tibetan tradition, whoever held the stone held the key to Shambhala, a mythical kingdom in Tibetan Buddhism. According to one tradition throughout history, the Cintamani has been an important instrument of the divine, intended to guide humanity in the right direction, given freely only to those people thought worthy of its vast power. Such famous figures such as King Solomon, Genghis Khan, and Akbar the Great are said to have possessed the Cintamani stone. For a number of treasure hunters, the Cintamani stone is as real as the Philosopher's Stone or the Holy Grail, and many have searched in vain to find it. Apparently, Roerich knew that the Shambhala was believed to be the earthly link to heaven, and that its realm on earth lay in a secret valley somewhere deep in the Himalayas. Some believe that Roerich's expedition found the lost valley in the Himalayas and was also able to locate the Cintamani stone. Once he had obtained the fabled stone, Roerich apparently described it as a piece of moldavite, an olive-green or blue-greenish vitreous silica projectile rock formed by a meteorite impact probably in southern Germany. Roerich allegedly also discovered Sanskrit lettering inscribed upon it, which he translated to read, "Through the stars I come. I bring the chalice covered with a shield. Within it I bring treasure." In one version of events, Roerich then took the Cintamani stone to Europe, supposedly to help form the League of Nations. However, after the collapse of the League, Roerich took the stone back to Tibet, where it's said to remain to this day. In his 1930 book, Shambhala, Roerich records the following conversation about the Cintamani stone with a Tibetan Lama. "Do you know in the West something about the great stone in which magic powers are concentrated? And do you know from which planet this came? And who possessed this treasure?" "Lama, about the great stone, we have as many legends as you have images of Cintamani. From the old Druidic times, many nations remember these legends of truth about the natural energies concealed in this strange visitor to our planet. Very often in such fallen stones are hidden diamonds, but these are nothing in comparison with some other unknown metals and energies which are found every day in the stones and in the numerous currents and rays. Lapis exilis thus is named the stone, which is mentioned by the old Meister singers. One sees that the West and East are working together on many principles. We do not need to go on to the deserts to hear the stone. In our cities, in our scientific laboratories, we have other legends and proofs. Would anyone have thought that the fairy tales regarding the flying man would ever be fulfilled? Yet now, each day's mail, each day's visitors may come flying. The Tarim mummies are a baffling ancient world mystery, and one of the most remarkable archaeological finds of the 20th century. These amazingly well-preserved human remains were found in the dry, salty environment of the vast Taklamakan Desert in western China. One warrior's body had reddish-brown hair and a ginger beard, stood 6 feet tall, and was buried wearing a red twill tunic and tartan leggings. He looks every inch a Celt. Even his DNA says so. The bodies found have an extremely wide date range, from 1800 BC up until AD 400, and seem to represent unknown Caucasian tribes who lived in this desolate area of western China up until 2,000 years ago, before mysteriously disappearing. What were they doing here, and who were they? The mummies were first discovered in the early 1900s by Swedish explorer Sven Hedin, who was investigating the complex history of the Silk Road, an ancient series of routes which once led from China to Turkey and then on to Europe. However, without the necessary equipment to either preserve the bodies or transport them back to museums in Europe for study, they remained in situ and were soon forgotten about. In 1978, Chinese archaeologist Wang Binghua excavated 113 bodies at a cemetery of Huitzilopochtli in the northeast corner of the Central Asian province of Xinjiang. Most of the bodies were later taken to a museum in the city of Urumqi. In the last 25 years or so, archaeologists have carried out sophisticated excavation and research in the area, and there are now over 300 of these mummies known to have been discovered in Western China. In 1987, Victor Mayer, a professor of Chinese and Indo-Iranian literature and religion at the University of Pennsylvania, was leading a group of tourists through the museum in Urumqi when he came upon some of the mummies excavated by Wang Bingua. He found it an unnerving experience. All were dressed in dark purple wooden garments and felt boots, and their bodies were almost perfectly preserved. All the mummies had European features: brown, blonde hair, long noses and skulls, slim, elongated bodies, and large, deep-set eyes. Due to the political climate in China at the time, Mayer was not able to do anything about the amazing finds. But in 1993, he returned with a team of Italian geneticists who had worked on the Iceman, a well-preserved 5,000-year-old natural mummy of a man found in the Alps in 1991. The group went back to the site to examine the bodies, which had been reburied due to lack of storage space at the museum. Mayer and his team took DNA samples from the bodies, which proved that the mummies were Caucasian. Mayer's research also seems to show that the earliest of these European mummies represented the first settlers in the Tarim basin. The oldest of all the Western Chinese mummies is known as the Beauty of Lulan. This perfectly preserved female body was discovered by Chinese archaeologists in 1980 near the ancient town of Lulan, situated on the northeastern edge of the Taklamakan Desert. This woman, who died at the age of 40 around 4,800 years ago, had European features, including a steep nose bridge, high cheekbones and blondish-brown hair, which had been rolled up under a felt headdress. She was wearing a woolen shroud and leather boots, and buried with her in the grave were a comb and a beautifully made straw basket which contained grains of wheat. Another expedition to the Lulan region in 2003 by the Archaeological Institute revealed some remarkable finds. Excavations were undertaken at a cemetery consisting of a sand mound located 177 kilometers from the ancient town of Lulan. A particularly interesting find at the gravesite was made close to the center of the mound and proved to be another impressive freeze-dried mummy. Contained in a boat-shaped coffin, the female mummy had been wrapped in a woolen blanket and was wearing a felt hat and leather shoes. She had been buried with a red-painted face mask, a bracelet containing a jade stone, a leather pouch, a woolen loincloth, and ephedra sticks. Ephedra is a medicinal shrub which was once used in the religious rituals of Iran, so there was perhaps some connection between the two areas. A further group of mummies from the Tarim Basin region consisted of one man, 3 women and a baby, and have become known as the Chechen mummies. The 4 adult bodies, thought to date to around 1000 BC, were dressed in the same color with red and blue cords wrapped around their hands, perhaps indicating a close kinship. Chechen Man, the male mummy, was 6 feet 6 inches tall and died at the age of 50. He had light brown, long braided hair, a thin beard, and multiple tattoos on his face. The man was buried with no less than 10 different styled hats and was dressed in a purple red 2-piece suit. Like Chechen Man, the main female burial had numerous tattoos on her face and was over 6 feet tall. She was wearing a red dress and white deerskin boots, and had her light brown hair gathered into 2 long plaits. There was also a 3-month-old baby buried with the adults, who was wearing a blue felt bonnet and had blue stones covering its eyes. Buried beside the infant were a cow horn cup and nursing bottle made from a sheep's udder. The family is thought to have died in some sort of epidemic. What has fascinated archaeologists most about these finds is the amazing preservation of the brightly coloured and patterned European-looking clothing that the people were wearing. Dr. Elizabeth Barber, Professor of Linguistics and Archaeology at Occidental College in Los Angeles, has made a detailed study of the textiles recovered from the Tarim Basin and found striking similarities to Celtic tartans from northwest Europe. She has also proposed that the tartan from the Tarim mummies and that from Europe share a common origin in the Caucasus Mountains of southern Russia, where the earliest evidence for such fabrics date back to at least 5,000 years ago. The rich array of textile finds from Western Chinese mummy burials includes ropes, caps, shirts, cloaks, tartan-weave trousers, and striped woolen stockings. At Sebeshi, on the northern route of the Silk Road, 3 female mummies dating from around 5 to 400 BC were found with enormously tall-pointed hats and have since become known as the Witches of Sebeshi. The question remains, who were these apparently European peoples and what were they doing in Western China? The mummies are scattered over such a wide geographical area and a date range that can be no question that they are a single tribe. They seem to represent several eastward migrations from different areas over 1,000 or more years. There are some ancient sources referring to groups inhabiting the areas of the Tarim basin where mummies have been found, which may give a clue to the origins of at least some of the mummy people. First millennium BC Chinese sources mention a group of white people with long hair, known as the Bai people. The Bai lived on the northwestern border of China, and the Chinese apparently bought jade from them. Another group on the northwestern borders of China were the Yuezhi, mentioned in 645 BC by the Chinese author Huan Yong. The Yuezhi also supplied the Chinese with jade, which they got from the nearby mountains of Yutzi at Gansu. After being defeated by the nomadic Xiongnu people, the majority of them migrated to and part of southern Asia, equivalent to modern Uzbekistan and southwest Kazakhstan, and later to northern India, where they founded the Kushan Empire. Depictions of Yuezhi kings on coinage have suggested to some that this group may have been a Caucasian people. The final group who inhabited this area were the Tocharians, who represent the easternmost speakers of an Indo-European language, a language group comprising most of the languages of Europe, India, and Iran. Some scholars that they were in fact the same people with different names, though there is no proof of this at present. The areas of western China, where European-type mummies have been found, in the northeast of the Tarim basin, and further east in the area around Lopnur, correspond well to the later distribution of the Tocharian language. Chinese writings mention that the Tocharians had long blonde or red hair and blue eyes, and frescoes from Buddhist caves in the Tarim basin dating to around the 9th century AD show a people with distinctly European features. The Tocharians remained in the Tarim basin and later adopted Buddhism from northern India, their culture surviving at least until the 8th century AD, when they seem to have been assimilated by the Turks of the eastern Asian steppes. Although no Tocharian texts exist or have ever been found with mummies in the Tarim basin, the almost identical geographical location of both, as well as the depictions of the Tocharians showing European features, strongly suggest that at least some of the mummy people of the area were the ancestors of the Tocharians. But did this people trek all the way across Europe and half of Asia to find their homeland in the arid deserts of western China? Judging by textile evidence for the original tartan in the Caucasus Mountains of South Russia and the linguistic evidence placing the beginnings of the Indo-European language in the same area, it seems that perhaps there was migration from the Caucasus at a very early date. Dr. Elizabeth Barber hypothesizes that there may have been 2 migrations from the possible Indo-European homeland northwest of the Black Sea, one to the west resulting in Celtic and other European civilizations, and the other migration the ancestors of the Tocharians, moving east, eventually finding their way into the Tarim basin of Central Asia. In the light of the finds of the Tarim mummies, the theory that East and West developed their civilizations in complete isolation from each other may have to be abandoned. The Mogao grottos, known as the Mogao Caves, the Dunhuang Caves, or the Thousand Buddha Caves, are a network of Buddhist cave temples in China. This site is located near the city of Dunhuang in the northwestern Chinese province of Gansu. This ancient city was once located in an oasis on a strategic point of the ancient Silk Road. Thus, Dunhuang was the center where not only trade but also cultural, religious and intellectual exchanges took place. The Mogao grottos serve as a testimony to the high level of sophistication that was achieved by Dunhuang during its day. The legend of Li Zun's 1,000 Buddhas. The Mogao grottos are famed for their statues and wall paintings, and it's best known for its showcase of 1,000 years of Buddhist art. According to one source, the Mogao grotto has been described as the largest, most richly endowed, and longest used treasure house of Buddhist art in the world. The Mogao grottos span a distance of 1.6 kilometers, 0.99 miles, from north to south, and contain as many as 492 known cells and cave sanctuaries. With these, more than 2,000 painted sculptures and about 45,000 square meters of murals can be found. According to tradition, the first temple in the Mogao grottos was made in 366 AD. A legend said to have originated during the Tang dynasty credits a Buddhist monk by the name of Li Zun, Yuzun, as the founder of this temple complex. In this legend, the monk had a vision of 1,000 Buddhas. Inspired by what he saw, the monk decided to build a temple and is said to have succeeded in convincing a wealthy Silk Road merchant to fund his project. Soon, others followed Li Zun's examples and carved their own temples into the sandstone cliffs. The following centuries saw the rise and fall of numerous dynasties in China. Nevertheless, each new dynasty added to the artwork of the Mogao grottos. Activity in the Mogao grottos reached its peak during the Tang dynasty, as it was during this time that Buddhism was established all over China. Additionally, the rulers of the Tang dynasty were great patrons of the Buddhist faith, and the number of cave temples in operation during this period of time exceeded 1,000. As new trade routes became utilized more often in the following centuries, the importance of the Dunhuang also declined. Sometime during the 14th century AD, after the fall of the Yuan dynasty, the Mogao grottos were sealed off, abandoned, and largely forgotten by the rest of the world. Library Cave Discovery. Whilst the Mogao grottos are said to have been visited by pilgrims even after its abandonment, it gained international interest in 1900. It was during this year that a Taoist priest by the name of Wang Yuanlu made an amazing discovery by accident. Wang is said to have been the self-appointed guardian of some of the site's cave temples, and was responsible for conserving the site. In 1900, a hidden door was stumbled upon while sand from Cave 16 was being cleared away. Behind this secret door was a small cave filled with ancient manuscripts, sutras, as well as paintings on silk and paper dating from the 4th to the 11th centuries AD. This chamber was originally constructed as a memorial cave for a local monk on his death in the 9th century AD. Due to this discovery of the cache of documents within it, however, it is known today as the Library Cave. This hidden chamber, which has been designated Cave 17, is believed to have been sealed up during the 11th century. At that time, the significance of this discovery was not realized in China. Following his find, Wang went to the county town to report what he had happened upon to local authorities, who were not interested in it at all. Over the next few years, Wang is reported to have attempted to convince several government officials of the value of his discovery, in the hopes that more preservation work might be done, but to no avail. The lack of interest shown by the Chinese officials eventually led to the fall of these priceless documents into the hands of Western scholars. In 1907, R.L. Stein, a Hungarian working for the British, visited the grottos and succeeded in persuading Wang to sell a large number of manuscripts and paintings from the Library Cave. In the following year, a Frenchman by the name of Paul Pelliot managed to negotiate a similar deal with Wang. It was only in 1961 that the importance of the Mogao grottos was finally recognized by the Chinese authorities and was declared a national monument. In 1987, the Mogao grottos were inscribed as a World Heritage Site. Over the years, this site has become a tourist attraction, and archaeological as well as conservation work are being carried out there. Mysteries of ancient Buddhist cave temple writings solved. Researchers have successfully dated a set of mysterious phrases discovered on the ceiling of a Tibetan Tantric Buddhist cave temple in China. The Mogao caves are located on the ancient Silk Road in Dunhuang, northwest China, on the edge of the Gobi Desert. This dedicated UNESCO World Heritage Site features sacred meditational environments with high ceilings covered with paintings and inscriptions, some dated to over 1,000 years ago. Now, a research team using 3D spectral imaging equipment have scanned one of the Buddhist cave temples, and their high-resolution imaging of these ancient paintings and writings has solved several historical mysteries. How one Mogao Buddhist cave temple was dated. Researchers from Nottingham-Trent University were assisted by scientists from the Dunhuang Research Academy in China and the British Library. Professor Haider Liang, head of the Imaging and Sensing for Archaeology, Art History and Conservation Research Group, ISAAC, at Nottingham-Trent University, told the Nottingham Post that the 3D spectral imaging was able to identify colours that are not visible to the naked eye, and that a machine learning application took care of crunching the vast amount of scanned data. She added that our analysis has enabled us to date this cave with much more certainty than ever before. Nearly 500 Mogao Buddhist cave temples dating from the 4th to the 14th century AD have been found by archaeologists. However, this international research team made what they call the unusual discovery of a mistake made by workers more than 700 years ago. The ceiling of this particular Buddhist cave temple, Cave 465, is painted with images of the 5 celestial Buddhas. But the researchers were unable to read the faded red Sanskrit paper writing at the foot of each of the 5 Buddhas because the letters were flipped. Did the Buddhist cave temple workers understand Sanskrit? These small pieces of paper were painted or printed and then pasted on the ceiling face down. Dr. Haider Liang said that they were produced during the construction of the Buddhist cave temple as part of a consecrational ritual, and that their being reversed was a fascinating discovery. The researcher thinks that this was a mistake, and she suggests the workmen who attached the pieces of paper perhaps didn't understand Sanskrit. The written text is a Buddhist Sanskrit phrase known as the summary of dependent origination. In Peter Harvey's book, Buddhism, we learn this phrase highlights the Buddhist notion that all apparently substantial entities within the world are in fact wrongly perceived. What Harvey means by this is when we Westerners use terms such as I, self, river, and bird, and so on, to identify permanent and stable things, in the teachings of Buddha, all things arise from causes. Buddhist cave temple colors and letters used for dating. Analysis of the paint colors in this particular Buddhist cave temple revealed that the red pigment was created from cinnabar, and that gypsum and dolomite were used to make white, while the yellow color was made with orpiment. According to the research team, in Tibetan period caves, 7th to 9th century AD, gypsum was never used to make white, and yellow was only ever made with ochre pigment rather than orpiment. However, these specific color combinations were used together in the Mongol Wan period, early 13th century to 1368 AD. With this data, the researchers applied the discipline of paleography, the study of historic writing systems and the deciphering and dating of historical manuscripts. Certain letters were identified that were not written in the way depicted until after the late 12th century AD. Thus, the team dated the paintings from the late 12th to the 13th century. Returning to Professor Haider Liang's suggestion that the workmen made a mistake by attaching the pieces of paper the wrong way round, perhaps this was no mistake and only appears as such by today's standards. While they appear to be flipped to us, what if the ancient messages were turned around so that they were conceptually readable for the 5 Buddhas for whom they were written? To assume that the Buddhists who made the sacred paper messages accidentally turned them around is akin to an archaeologist in the future excavating a modern ambulance and assuming that vehicle manufacturers were all stupid because they spelt the word ambulance on the bonnet back to front. In Jerusalem, the discovery of 2 homemade seals may provide unprecedented insights into an extremely critical period in Jewish history and the Bible. The artifact is showing that the city remained an administrative center even after the destruction of Jerusalem in 587 BC. It may also provide clues as to the resettlement of the city by the Jews after Babylonian exile. The finds were made by archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority and Tel Aviv University. They were unearthed during an excavation in a parking lot in an historic part of Jerusalem. A seal, which is often known by the Latin term bullae, was uncovered. It was made of recycled pottery shards. The object is about 2 inches, 8 centimeters in width, and has a double impression and several carvings representing symbols. Findings of mysterious seals from Persian period. The seal would have been used to sign documents or attach to containers. This was done by officials to ensure that they were not tampered with or intercepted. Along with this seal was a strange DIY pottery shard seal with fake writing, reports the Times of Israel. On it are inscribed a figure seated with 2 pillars. Because of its size, it may have been used to seal large containers rather than parchment. CBN News quotes the researchers who took part in the study as saying that the larger seal was probably Babylonian because of its design, and that the person sitting on the chair is believed to be a king, and the columns probably represent the Babylonian gods Nabu and Marduk. Several similar objects have been uncovered that date from the times of Persian rule in the area 536 to 333 BC. The date of the artifact makes it important because, as Dr. Yiftach Shalev of the Israel Antiquities Authority told the Times of Israel, the Persian period is a black hole in archaeology. This is even though it witnessed the rebirth of Jerusalem and the restoration of the Jews to their homeland after 50 years of exile. The Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem and raising of the First Temple. The Neo-Babylonians, under King Nebuchadnezzar, destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC, razing the First Temple and deporting most of the survivors back to Babylon. The era of the Babylonian exile is known as the Babylonian captivity, when the Jews were virtually enslaved. After the defeat of Babylon by the Persian ruler Cyrus the Great, the Jews could return to their native places. Jerusalem and the Second Temple were rebuilt under the leadership of the prophets Ezra and Nehemiah, which was crucial in the history of Judaism. Little is known how they resettled in the city of David and their history at this time, which is known as the Return to Zion period, a period we knew about mainly from biblical literature, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, explained Professor Yuval Gadot and Dr. Yiftach Shalev, cited in the Jerusalem Post. There are almost no other sources and extraordinary little in the archaeological record about this critical period in the history of the Near East. Seals discovered in the ruins of Jerusalem. The 2 items were uncovered in what may have been a camp set up in a courtyard that was destroyed in 586 BC. It appears that the Jews returning from the Babylonian exile used the rubble to create dwellings. The 2 seals probably date back to the early days of their reoccupation of the city of David. We know that there was a bureaucracy during the Persian period, explained Dr. Shalev, according to the Times of Israel. The seals are evidence that there existed some form of administration and government in the city. Professor Yuval Gadot and Dr. Shalev are reported by the Jerusalem Post as saying that the twin discoveries show that, despite the city's dire situation after the destruction, efforts were made to restore the administrative authorities to normal. Despite the return of the Jews, their holy city and land was part of the Persian Empire, even though they enjoyed a great deal of autonomy and religious freedom. The seals may have belonged to low-ranking Jewish or even Persian bureaucrats working for the administration that was rebuilding the city of David. The problem of accurate dating. Archaeology has found other items, such as imported pottery and fish bones, within the same layer as the seal. This could indicate that Jerusalem rapidly recovered economically after the return of the Jews after their Babylonian exile. But these finds do not categorically prove that Jews were living in the ruins of Jerusalem, as dating the items accurately has proven to be difficult. They could date and range from the Babylonian destruction to the Hellenistic era, 4th century BC, based on analysis conducted thus far. Carbon dating this period is tricky, explains Dr. Shalev in the Times of Israel. They were found along with some organic material, namely fish bones, and this may help in the accurate dating of these finds. This is essential so that the artifacts can be confirmed to be from the Persian era. The Taking of Christ is a painting of the arrest of Jesus by the Italian artist Caravaggio, originally painted in 1602. One mysterious aspect of the work is its depiction of an enigmatic figure who's holding a lantern and looking intently at the action happening before him. There has been much speculation about who the figure is supposed to be, though most believe it to be a self-portrait of the artist himself. By the late 18th century, the painting was thought to have somehow disappeared, and its whereabouts remained unknown for about 200 years until it was discovered by chance in Dublin, Ireland in the 1990s. Where had the lost masterpiece been for 2 centuries, and why had it disappeared? Italian painter Michelangelo Marisa di Caravaggio was born on the 19th of September in 1571 in Milan. Caravaggio is the name of the artist's hometown in Lombardy in northern Italy. He trained as a painter under Simone Petrosano, who had himself studied under the famous painter Titian. In 1592, at the age of 21, he moved to Rome, Italy's artistic centre, where for the first few years he struggled as a painter. He specialized in still lifes, mainly of fruit and flowers, and later half-length figures in the Baroque style, which he sold on the streets of the city. Caravaggio's short life was followed by mystery and intrigue. Constantly in trouble with the law, he wrecked his own apartment, spent time in jail on several occurrences, and eventually had a death warrant circulated on him by the Pope. He had a particularly violent temper and was arrested a number of times for slashing the cloak of an adversary, throwing a plate of artichokes at a waiter, scarring a guard, and abusing the police. This was in addition to a murder charge after he killed another man, accidentally he claimed, in a sword fight. In 1608, while still wanted for the murder in Rome, he attacked and wounded Father Giovanni Rodomonte Roero, one of the most senior knights of the Order of St. John in Malta. This organization were Christian soldiers waging guerrilla warfare against the forces of Islam from their secure island fortress in the Mediterranean. Although Caravaggio went to prison for the assault, he later managed to escape from the rock-cut cell with the aid of an accomplice. He evaded the castle guard, scaled the ramparts and lowered himself down a sheer 200-foot precipice and boarded a boat awaiting him below. He escaped to Naples, but Roero's men later found him there and attacked him, severely disfiguring his face. Caravaggio later moved to Naples, Malta and Sicily and died probably of malaria in Porto Ercole, near Grosseto in Tuscany in 1610. There are some, however, who believe that Caravaggio was murdered, perhaps by members of the Order of St. John. Caravaggio produced masterpieces of incredible complexity and power, advancing the Baroque style to include depictions of real people of the streets surrounded by blunt emotional truth. Spurned after his death, Caravaggio is now recognized as one of the fathers of modern painting. He said of his art, "All works, no matter what or by whom painted, are nothing but bagatelles and childish trifles, unless they are made and painted from life, and there can be nothing better than to follow nature." The Taking of Christ is a painting by Caravaggio which depicts the moments Judas betrayed Christ and his capture by Roman soldiers. The work, painted in oil, measures 53 inches by 63 inches. Caravaggio painted the extraordinary Taking of Christ for the Roman Marquis Syriaco-Mattei in 1602. In the painting, Caravaggio presented an entirely novel view of biblical stories, placing the figures close to the picture plane and making the use of powerful light and dark contrast, giving the scene an astonishing sense of drama. All the subjects in the masterpiece are rendered in profile or partial light, with no one looking directly out to the audience. The paintings normally depict the action only. There is no visible background. In the work, Judas has identified Christ with a kiss as the temple guards approach to seize him. The disciples attempt to escape, while on the far left stands St. John the Evangelist, facing away from the action and raising his hands in despair. Jesus offers no resistance to his destiny. In all, there are 7 figures in the painting: John, Jesus, Judas, 3 soldiers, and a man holding a lantern to light the events. This strange man has been the subject of controversy for hundreds of years. Who was he, and why was he standing at the far edge of the painting, holding a lantern? Scholars were sure that he wasn't any biblical character they were aware of. Perhaps both he and his lantern symbolized some secret that only Caravaggio was aware of. Nowadays, however, most art critics believe the mysterious figure is a depiction of Caravaggio himself, observing the events, a device he often used in paintings. Caravaggio's taking of Christ was a well-documented commission, and was often copied by other artists of the time. In fact, there are at least 12 known copies of the painting in existence. At least one is believed to be the original copy made by Caravaggio himself. It is known that the masterpiece was sold by the family in 1802. However, by the late 18th century, the original painting had seemingly disappeared. Nothing was heard of the work for 200 years until scholars began searching for it in the 1940s, as many researchers no longer accepted the authenticity of a painting in the Odessa Art Museum in the Ukraine, now known to be a copy made for a member of the Mattei family in 1626. However, their search proved fruitless and the painting was thought lost forever. However, a few decades later, in the early 1990s, a young art student named Francesca Cappelletti made an astonishing discovery. She found a note related to the painting in the archives of the Matteis, once one of Rome's wealthiest and most powerful noble families, explaining that the taking of Christ was originally commissioned around 1602 for Syriaco-Mattei, an enthusiastic art collector. Cappelletti and her research partner undertook further research and were able to trace the painting through the Mattei archives up to the late 1700s, when it was unaccountably mislabeled as a work by one of Caravaggio's less talented students, the minor Dutch Golden Age painter Gerard van Honthorst. The researchers discovered that the Mattei family began selling pieces of their huge art collection accumulated during the early 19th century. The painting, still at the time attributed to Van Honthorst, was bought by the Scottish politician William Hamilton Nesbitt and remained in his possession until 1921. In that year, the painting was then put up for auction in Edinburgh and bought for 8 guineas by an art dealer who seemed to have sold it to an Irish doctor named Mary Leah Wilson, the wife of a captain in the Royal Irish Constabulary, RIC, the English Army's police force in Ireland. After the death of her husband in 1920, Leah Wilson joined the staff of St. Patrick Dunn's Hospital and became a well-known paediatrician. In 1924, she sent the painting to cabinet makers and furniture restorers James Hicks in Dublin for repairs, possibly to the frame. In the early 1930s, Dr. Leah Wilson gave the paintings as a gift to a Jesuit priest, Father Thomas Finlay. Father Finlay was living in the Jesuit House of Writers at Lower Leeson Street in Dublin, and the painting was hung opposite in the fireplace of the dining room. Around the same time, Cappelletti was uncovering the mysterious life of the paintings in the Mattei archive. The Jesuits asked Sergio Benedetti, an Italian conservator at the National Gallery of Ireland, to assess their collection of paintings as some were in need of restoration. After cleaning one of the paintings, Benedetti realized it was actually the original Taking of Christ by Caravaggio. The painting, worth tens of millions of euros, had been hanging, covered in dust, in the dining room, unrecognized for almost nearly 60 years. Benedetti's work, combined with Cappelletti's findings, led to the confirmation of the discovery. After the painting was professionally cleaned and authenticated, it was revealed to an astonished art world to be the lost Caravaggio entitled The Taking of Christ. In 1993, it was given to the Irish state on indefinite loan by the Jesuits and unveiled to the public in the National Gallery of Ireland in the same year. In November 1993, The Taking of Christ was the centerpiece of the exhibition Caravaggio, The Master Revealed, curated by Benedetti, which publicly announced its attribution to the Baroque master Caravaggio and confirmed Benedetti's vital role in one of the great art discoveries of the 20th century. Other than a few short loans to other museums, The Taking of Christ has hung in the National Gallery of Ireland ever since. A Hebrew University archaeology professor claims that he has identified 3 small male figurines which date back to the 10th and 9th centuries BC as the first known depictions of the biblical Israelite god Yahweh. However, there is controversy over the finds, as other researchers maintain at that time it would have been prohibited to create such images. The face of God. In the autumn 2020 issue of the popular archaeology magazine Biblical Archaeology Review, Hebrew University professor Joseph Garfinkel published his theory that a few small male figurines associated with horse statues dating to the 10th and 9th centuries BC, which were discovered in various sites from the ancient kingdom of Judah, are actually representations of the biblical Israelite god Yahweh. Yes, I think that people in ancient times believed these figurines to represent the face of Yahweh, Garfinkel told the Times of Israel. But most Israeli archaeologists vehemently disagree with Garfinkel's opinion, many of them pointing out that the hypothesis was published in a popular magazine rather than an academic journal. His critics even include the discoverers of the controversial artifacts themselves, Tel Mosa excavation co-directors Shua Kislevitz and Odette Lipschitz. According to them, unfortunately, this article is pure sensationalism that caters to popular money-generating demand, in presenting an unfounded and at best tentative identification as factual as he ignores existing professional research and studies, including avoiding reference to any of the publications by the excavators. The discoveries of the artifacts. About 10 years ago, Garfinkel's excavation team discovered what he believed was a rare male clay figurine head whilst working at the site of Kirbet Quafa, some 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. The find came from a layer Garfinkel said was securely dated to the 10th century BC from over 30 radiocarbon-dated organic samples. Garfinkel wrote about the discovery of this clay figurine. With a flat top, the head has protruding eyes, ears, and a nose. The eyes were made in 2 stages. They were first attached to the face as rounded blobs of clay and then punctured to create the iris. Because the ears are pierced, the figurine may have worn earrings. Around the top of the head is a circle of holes, which could have been used to hold a crown or other headdress. The reason that Garfinkel became so excited about this find was that while there have been thousands of female fertility figures discovered from prehistoric times onwards in the area, the discovery of a male clay statue was unique. However, from the 10 Commandments onward, the warning against creating and worshipping physical depictions of God is a recurring theme in the Bible. Yet, generations of the people of Israel are described to consistently failing to follow the rule, and the practice of idolatry was said to be widespread up until the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC. Indeed, although the Bible states very clearly that graven images of God should never be made, Garfinkel believes that the distance between theology and what actually happened in reality may have been vast. He points out that although the Bible urged leaders of the people of Israel to stop worshipping household gods, archaeological excavations in the area have consistently turned up large quantities of representations of cultic deities. Yahweh on a horse. Garfinkel believes that the clay figurine represents a god different from all others because the god riding a horse is a total different iconography. The horseman is something new, he said. At the time of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, neighboring early Iron Age, 11th to 9th century BC peoples, each worshipped a different god. The Moabites had the god Chemosh, the Edomites had Kus, and here we had Yahweh, said Garfinkel. Following the discovery of Garfinkel's male figurine, the excavations at the temple complex at Tel Mosa, 5.5 miles northwest of ancient Jerusalem, revealed two similar heads, which were found adjacent to horse figurines. In early 2020, it was revealed that archaeologists had discovered traces of two in the ancient city of Mosa, an Iron Age administrative centre where grain was stored and redistributed. The earlier temple on the site had been roughly dated to the 10th century BC, while a monumental temple complex built over it dated to the late 10th century to early 9th century BC. Its excavators believe the temple complex at Mosa conformed to religious conventions in the Kingdom of Judah at the time, though biblical texts state that King Hezekiah and King Josiah confined worship to Jerusalem's first temple. Archaeologists believe, therefore, that the existence of the temple complex in Mosa indicates other temples continue to function outside of Jerusalem. Perhaps Mosa's local leaders built the temple complex to increase their control over the region and reinforce the success of the grain distribution business. The cultic artifacts recovered from the site included human-shaped and horse figurines, a cult stand decorated with lions or sphinxes, a stone altar, a stone offering table, and a pit filled with ash and bones. The discovery of these sacred objects inside the temple was particularly surprising. There is little evidence for ritual practices, especially so near to Jerusalem at this period. At some time during the later Iron Age, ritual sites outside of Jerusalem were shut down and religious practices were concentrated exclusively at the temple in the capital city. After seeing the clay heads in the same context as the horses at Moza, Garfinkel thought of another male horseman from the Moshe Dayan's collection, now located in the Israel Museum. He wondered whether these figures were related, and if they depicted a god, which one was it? As the Mosa horseman god figures were found in a temple complex rather than in a home, would rule them out as simple household deities. Consequently, reasoned Garfinkel, the statues must have represented the religion of the time and its god Yahweh. According to Garfinkel, when we uncovered the first figurine in 2010, there were no parallels to it. Only 2 years later, two similar heads were found in Tel Mosa. When I saw how similar those heads were, I started looking for more items, and I found two similar objects in the Moshe Dayan collection at the Israel Museum. Garfinkel believes the two Mosa heads and horse figurines are best interpreted together as a single piece, as male figures mounted on horses. This type of horse and rider figurine is found in the ancient Near East in the 2nd millennium BC, but it did not become common in the Kingdom of Israel until the 8th century BC. Its newfound popularity coinciding with the increasing use of cavalry in regional warfare. But some archaeologists have also asked why, if this statue was a depiction of Yahweh, it is so crude and artless. Garfinkel believes that compared to rich areas like Egypt and Mesopotamia in the Kingdom of Judah was poor and small, only containing between 5 to 20,000 people at its peak, living in a very basic peasant life on the 19 or so miles of arable land between Beit Shemesh and Lachish. Archaeologists not convinced. Essentially, Garfinkel's theory of the depiction of Yahweh is based on two male heads discovered in the same temple complex at Tel Mosa, but many Israeli archaeologists believe that it is not convincing evidence for the face of Yahweh. Tel Mosa excavators, for example, reject the theory completely, stating that Garfinkel's article is riddled with factual inaccuracies and a flawed methodological approach. They've also criticized Garfinkel for including two unprovenanced items bought on the antiquities market. A Philistine-type strainer jar and a rider and horse-shaped vessel is his evidence. The two archaeologists have criticized Garfinkel's theory in no uncertain terms, writing, "Although we cannot rule out the possibility that the human heads depicting gods, they have no markings, symbols, or attributes, such as horns, crescents, bulls, and so on, found on figures and visual representations throughout the ancient Near East that would identify them as divine figures. Furthermore, when gods were depicted on animals, they didn't sit on them, they stood on them. His association of the figurine heads with Yahweh is based on the very late depiction of Yahweh as a rider on a horse in Habakkuk 3.8, and his erroneous statement that the heads from Mosa are outstanding in their large size in relation to almost all known anthropomorphic figurines is meant to differentiate them from other figurines in order to substantiate his claim that they are divine. They also claim that Garfinkel has ignored all the early Iron Age horse and human figurines and figures found throughout the region, some of which provide significantly better parallels for the figurines. One of their other criticisms is Garfinkel's liberal use of the biblical sources, stating specifically that while it is true that while God is described as a rider, he is never mentioned as actually riding horses. But Garfinkel is adamant that his theory has merit and continues to work on discovering further evidence to support it, and finally convinces peers that he has indeed found the face of God on a 3,000-year-old figurine. The ancient Greek site of Delphi is shrouded in legend and mystery. Dedicated to Apollo, god of sunlight, arts and prophecy, it was home to a priestess who, 2,500 years ago, allegedly communicated with the gods on Olympus, relaying their wishes and prophecies to those mortals who were allowed an audience with her. But what actually took place at ancient Delphi? Located more than 1,800 feet up in the southwestern spur of Mount Parnassus, about 6 miles inland from the Corinthian Gulf, the ancient temple complex and Oracle of Delphi is one of the most dramatically situated archaeological sites in Greece. The Pan-Hellenic sanctuary of Delphi is known throughout the world as the home of the celebrated Oracle of Apollo and was regarded by the ancient Greeks as the center of the world. There is a myth which tells how 2 eagles sent out by Zeus from the opposite ends of the earth to find the navel of the world met at Delphi. To mark the site as the center of the earth and the universe, an amphalos, navel in ancient Greek stone, was set up in the Temple of Apollo. The imposing sanctuary of Apollo, situated on top of a large terrace, was undoubtedly the central part of ancient Delphi. Archaeologically, the earliest stone temple of Apollo on the site was built at some time during the 7th century BC, but burned down the following century. Its replacement was completed by around 510 BC by the Alcmaeonid family of Athens, though this too had to be reconstructed after an earthquake in 373 BC. It is the remains of this structure that we see today. The famous Oracle of Delphi was located in an inner shrine, an underground chamber measuring just 9 feet by 12 feet. According to some accounts, access to this shrine was restricted to the priests interpreting the words of the oracle priestess, called the Pythia. According to legendary accounts, the first temple in the sanctuary was made of laurel branches, the second of beeswax and feathers, the third of bronze, while the fourth was constructed by the legendary architects Trophonius and Agamedes, assisted by Apollo himself. There are various mythological explanations for the origin of the Delphi oracle. From the Homeric hymn to Apollo, probably 7th century BC, Delphi was sacred to Gaia, the goddess personifying the earth, and was guarded by her daughter, a ferocious dragoness called Python, also called Delphine by later writers. The lair of this dragon was a cave by the Castelline spring, where Apollo discovered her and slew her with his arrows. After killing the serpent, the new god of prophecy was given the name Pythian Apollo. In the Homeric hymn to Pythian Apollo, Delphi is described as rocky Pytho. In order to populate his shrine, Apollo in the form of a dolphin leapt aboard a Cretan ship and forced the sailors, strangers who once dwelt around the wooded Knos, to be the keepers and priests of his temple. The great god told the Cretans to worship him as Apollo Delphinius. Delphis is dolphin in Greek. A later tradition about the funding of the oracle site comes from 1st century BC Greek writer and historian Diodorus Siculus. This story tells of a goat herder named Coretas who came upon a chasm in the earth and noticed that whenever any of his goats approached the fissure, they would start leaping about and making strange sounds. Intrigued, the herdsman approached the chasm and peered down into it, only to discover that he too began to feel possessed, and also found he was able to foretell future events. After this event, he states, the report was bruited among the people of the vicinity concerning the experience of those who approached the chasm. An increasing number of persons visited the place, and as they all tested it because of its miraculous character, whosoever approached the spot became inspired. For those reasons, the oracle came to be regarded as a marvel and to be considered the prophecy-giving shrine of earth. But later, since many were leaping down into the chasm under the influence of their frenzy and all disappeared, it seemed best to station one woman there as a single prophetess for all and to have the oracles told through her. Originally, the Delphic oracle only functioned on one day of the year, though this was subsequently extended to one day in each of the 9 months between spring and autumn, when Apollo was said to be present at Delphi. In order to put a question to the Pythia, the inquirer first had to purify himself with holy water from the Castalian spring and pay a consultation fee. They would then approach the temple uphill along the sacred way, carrying laurel branches. The laurel tree was sacred to Apollo. An animal, usually a black ram, was then sacrificed in the forecourt of the temple, and if the signs from examining the entrails of the sacrifice were favorable, the inquirer was allowed to enter the temple. The Pythia was originally a virgin, but later a woman of at least 50 years old and married had found no traces of such fissures. However, in 2001, a research team of scientists led by geologist Gel Z. DeBoer of Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, discovered evidence of the presence of ethylene, a potential hallucinogen, in the temple's local geology and nearby springs. Thus, the team have argued that the intoxication was probably the cause of the Pythia's divinatory trances. Whilst the new research presents fascinating possibilities for the origin of the Pythia's trance state, it also leaves a few questions unanswered. The first problem is that if the inquirer and the Pythia were face-to-face, as some researchers have suggested, then why was it only the priestess who was affected by these toxic gases? Another point is that the quest to find what exactly put the priestess of Apollo at Delphi into a trance ignores the fact that her altered state may well have been self-induced, perhaps to give the impression of objectivity when answering inquiries. Another idea associated with the Pythia's supposed toxic high is the misconception that the Pythia rambled incoherent gibberish when in her trance, which had to be interpreted and reshaped into prophecies by the priests. In his 1981 book, The Delphic Oracle, Its Responses and Operations, with a catalogue of responses, American classical scholar Joseph Fontenrose challenged this notion. Examining ancient sources and separating literary artifice from the Pythia's genuine responses to inquiries, Fontenrose found that these answers were made in clear and precise prose, and the priestess herself was represented in these texts as speaking lucidly and in her own voice. Indeed, as Ruth Padel had noticed, Apollo-induced possession was the literary norm of classical Greece, the most relevant example being Cassandra, daughter of Priam and Hecuba of Troy, who, like the Pythia, is described as being possessed by Apollo, while she uttered her oracles in a kind of frenzy. The only difference was that Cassandra's prophecies were destined never to be believed. Perhaps then the only influence on Pythia's state was the effect of the soul or vital spirit, often associated in antiquity with a vapor, not as a toxic gas, but as the divine wisdom or breath of Apollo. The oracle at Delphi continued in use for 1,000 years until AD 393, when its last recorded response was given. In this year, Byzantine Empire, Theodosius, ordered pagan temples to cease operation. With the advent of Christianity, Delphi became an episcopal see, a territory over which a bishop rules, and there is an impressive 5th century basilica on the site. But by 6th-7th centuries, Delphi was abandoned, its place as the centre of the Greek world only a distant memory. Port Mahomac Monastery in eastern Scotland is believed to have been built by the ancient Picts, a mysterious ancient people who once inhabited the north and east of Scotland. Recent research has revealed that the construction of this monastery appears to reflect the golden ratio or divine proportion, as it became known during the Renaissance hundreds of years later. This formula was originally identified by the ancient Greeks, but academics are struggling to understand how a relatively isolated tribe in northwest Europe discovered this supposedly secret architectural formula. Who were the Picts? The ancient Picts were a mysterious and enigmatic race about who little is known for certain. By the time the Old Norse or Viking sagas were being compiled in the 13th century, the memory of the Picts as real people had almost vanished completely, and they had become a semi-mythical race of fairies. Indeed, in popular tradition, perhaps because of the low-roofed or underground structures they built, they were supposed to be small, who were confused with fairies, gnomes, brownies, and similar supernatural creatures. Much of the uncertainty surrounding the Picts is due to the fact that they left no written records. The name Pict may come from the Latin picti, which means painted, and may refer to their custom of body painting or possible even tattooing. Alternatively, they may have referred to them as Pect, the word for ancestors. One theory for their origins comes from the historian Bede, writing in 731, who said that the Picts had come from mainland Europe, possibly Scandinavia, to Northern Ireland to ask for land, but the Irish had refused and sent them on to Scotland. At the time of the Roman invasion of Britain in the 1st century AD, Scotland was inhabited by a number of different Celtic tribes, including the people who would later become known as the Picts. From the accounts of Britain written by ancient classical Greek and Roman authors, it appears that by the 3rd century AD, the predominant peoples of northern Scotland were all known as the Picts. The earliest surviving mention of the Picts dates from AD 297. In a poem in praise of the Roman Emperor Constantius Chlorus, the orator Eumenius mentioned the semi-naked Pict and Hiberni, Irish, as enemies of Rome. Indeed, the Picts' war with the Romans during the occupation was almost continual. It was a war which they ultimately won, as Scotland never fell to the armies of Rome despite numerous attempts to invade. The Pictish nation seems to have comprised of several federations, each with its own leader or king, and by the 7th century there was a united Pictland, which was already partly Christianized. In 843, Kenneth MacAlpin, king of the Scots, also became king of the Picts, united their two lands in a new kingdom of Alba, which eventually evolved into Scotland. After 900 AD, no further mention is made of the Picts. No one is sure what happened to them, why they suddenly vanished from history. However, many researchers believe that they may have merged with the southern Scots and the two cultures became one from then onwards. This unification of the two cultures was also influenced by the danger posed by the Vikings, whose raids along Scotland's northeastern coast were becoming more frequent. The Golden Ratio. The Golden Ratio, symbolized by the Greek letter phi, is a special number approximately equal to 1.618, which appears often in geometry, art, architecture, and other areas. The Golden Ratio is found when a line segment is cut into two pieces of different lengths, so that the ratio of the whole segment to that of the longer segment is equal to the ratio of the longer segment to the shorter segment. In the hugely influential ancient mathematics textbooks, Elements, written by Euclid of Alexandria around 300 BC, the definition reads, a straight line is said to have been cut in extreme and mean ratio, when, as the whole line is to the greater segment, so is the greater to the lesser. The Golden Ratio is also known as the Golden Section, Golden Mean, or Divine Proportion. While it has always existed, it's not known exactly when it was first discovered and used practically. Researchers believe that it has probably been discovered and rediscovered on numerous occasions throughout history, which may explain why there are several names to describe it. It has been conjectured that the ancient Egyptians may also have used both pi and phi in the design of the Great Pyramids. The classical Greeks are also thought to have based the design of the Parthenon on this proportion, though there is some debate about this. Many researchers claim that if a rectangle is drawn around the face of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, the ratio of the height to width of that rectangle is equal to the golden ratio. Some also think that Da Vinci also used it to define all the basic proportions of his painting The Last Supper. Although there is no proof to show Da Vinci consciously used the golden ratio in his work, it is known that he was a close personal friend of Luca Pacioli, who published a 3-volume discourse on the golden ratio in 1509 entitled Divine Proportions. Indeed, Da Vinci was responsible for the illustrations used in this work. It's certainly possible that not only Da Vinci, but other Renaissance artists used the golden mean in their paintings and sculptures to achieve balance and beauty. But what does all this talk of divine proportions have to do with an ancient Scottish tribe described by the Romans as primitive and half-savage? In fact, the Picts were skilled in farming and possessed a sophisticated culture, which included seagoing trade and the elaborate carving of paintings and stones. Portamahomac is a small fishing village on the shore of Dornoch Firth in northeast Scotland. Between 700 and 1100 Christian Pictish monks lived in a monastery on the site. The Pictish monastery was one of the most important archaeological finds for decades when it was discovered in the mid-90s. An ongoing work on material excavated there is still revealing fascinating information about its inhabitants and the monastery itself. So far, various sculptural fragments have been discovered, as well as Pictish burials and a Viking hoard dating to around 1000 AD, which have been secreted away in the wall of a church. There are also traces of burning in parts of the site, evidence that Viking raiders attacked the community at some point, according to experts. But it's the dimensions of one particular structure, known as the Smith's Hall, within the monastery complex that has attracted the most discussion. According to experts, this horseshoe-shaped building was constructed with an incredible symmetry that went way beyond what was necessary for such a building. When investigated further, the ratios of lengths of different walls and bays inside the window were incredibly found to conform to the principle of the golden ratio. Jean Gowans, former chairman of the Archaeological Heritage Society of Scotland, confessed her astonishment to learn that the Picts had been using the golden section. It's really absolutely fascinating. It's mind-blowing stuff. This is staggering to hear, but I'm not totally surprised. I think they were pretty sophisticated. When you think of all the Pictish stones and the wonderful carvings that they made, a lot more sophisticated than perhaps they are given credit for in public perception. But how did the Picts obtain such archaeological prowess and mathematical knowledge? Martin Carver, a professor of archaeology at York University in the UK, who has worked on the site since the mid-1990s, said, "The most important stone piece at the site has a Latin inscription. That's as common as muck in the Mediterranean, but extremely rare in Scotland. It says, 'This is the cross of Christ in memory of Rio,' and the rest is broken away. Unfortunately, the key bit, the name of the person, is missing. It means there's someone around there who knows how to write in the 8th century. That itself is a revelation." This indicates that at least some of the monks at the site had an extremely sophisticated education for the time, but this alone would not be enough to account for the use of the golden ratio at the monastery. He says, "The Picts have always been an attractive lost people. They are one of the most interesting lost peoples of Europe. The big question is what happened to them, and did they ever really make a kingdom of their own? They were the most extraordinary artists. They could draw a wolf, a salmon, an eagle on a piece of stone with a single line and produce a beautiful naturalistic drawing. Nothing as good as this is found between Portamahomac and Rome." Even the Anglo-Saxons didn't do stone carving as well as the Picts did. Not until the post-Renaissance were people able to get across the character of animals just like that.